The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.
Hello everyone, welcome in to Students of the Game. My name is Alex Baumann, and I'm joined by my two co-hosts today, Nathan Glidewell and Kurre Oldenburg. It's been a wild season of college basketball thus far, up and down teams outside of the top 25 that really have never been that far in the past couple of years, Kansas and UConn now falling outside of the top 25. But with March approaching, the best month for college basketball, before we get into the overarching landscape of college basketball, let's do what we always do and focus on the two big teams in the state of Alabama, that being the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Auburn Tigers. Nathan, let's start with the Crimson Tide because they had an up and down week. First going to Missouri and really struggling against the Tigers defensively. But then you turn around and you beat Kentucky in very commanding fashion. What happened in the midweek game against Missouri, and how were they able to bounce back and beat what was a really tough Kentucky team, even though they're down three key players?
Well, when you start off down 12-0, it is hard to win a basketball game. Of course, 12 points ended up being the difference in the final score. But my main takeaway was the slow start. It happened against Auburn when they got down 9-0, and it happened here against Missouri when they got down 12-0. So you can't afford to continue having these slow starts to games because it puts you behind, and really you have to dig out of the hole. Notably, Alabama is good enough to do that. They can score the ball enough to do that, but you don't want to be in that situation. But against Missouri, I mean, the first half, I have not seen two teams shoot the ball better all season long. I mean, percentages were in the 60s from the field and from three, and neither team could miss. It looked like an NBA game, honestly, with the amount of pace that was going on. When you go and put up 98 points on the road, you expect to win a game, not to somehow lose by double digits. So giving up 110 points in a game like this is unacceptable. I never want to see this happen again. I want this stricken from the record books, honestly. I don't want this game to count. The poor defense all around. You saw areas against Auburn where they struggled on defense, but this was just a total defensive collapse. This was a game you really need to bounce back from. You need to kind of center point the focus. And I felt like we didn't do that. We were all over the place. We didn't hustle when we needed to. We picked up stupid foul calls. The lineups somewhat were a little weird to me. I didn't think they really meshed well together. And just areas where we've struggled, I mean, all season long, have continued to bite us in the butt. I mean, you talk about our interior defense has continued to struggle. Cliff Amore hasn't been the player I thought he was going to be, especially, given what he was able to do at Rutgers the past few years. He's kind of taking a step back. Grant Nelson, so poor on the defensive end. He cannot guard anything in the paint. Jaron Stevenson, I expected him to be better, but he got bullied all game long. And unfortunately, a guy, Mohamed Diabate, who has a very high motor, is just not big enough. He's not big or tall enough to be able to guard some of these guys that we saw against Missouri. So it's situations like that where you need someone to step up. You want people who have experience like Cliff Amore to be able to step up and put themselves in that situation and say, I can provide what y'all need. That was a whole reason to go out and get Cliff this offseason, because the main piece of the puzzle that was missing from Alabama's team last season was the lack of interior defense, the lack of a shot blocker, a great rebounder. And Cliff just didn't perform up to the standards this game. I will say it was nice to note that Mark Sears kind of had a bounce back game. He scored 35 in the loss, which was big for his confidence, because after the Auburn game, that was very, very, very rough. But good to have him back on track. But I just keep going back to the defense. I mean, Mark Mitchell had a field day against us. It was awful to watch. It was frustrating. And honestly, it didn't matter how many shots we hit, because they would just come down the floor and hit more. Missouri's a very, very great team. They've been on a hot streak, and they continue to have that hot streak despite the loss to Arkansas on Saturday. But you got to remember that you're not guaranteed to win every single game. This was a road environment. They were very ready for us. the whole gym was filled out. I mean, students were very excited to be there. So you kind of had to move on from this loss as well. And we ended up doing that against Kentucky. But it was definitely not a game I wanted us to lose. I thought it was the beginning and the end once we did lose it. Yeah, but moving on to Kentucky, even with a slow start, which as soon as I saw that, I was like, all right, the game's over. I'm turning this off. It must be a me thing because as long as I'm watching the game, we're going to do terrible. I don't know. But we were able to fight back in this game and figure some things out. Mark Sears really was a leader of this team like he needed to be, and wasn't just a guy on the offensive end to say, hey, I can go and score 30-plus points, but I can also go on the defensive end and hound these opposing guards. And that's what he's able to do. You saw a lot more hustle, a lot more tenacity from him, and that really just gave the team a lot of energy to do it. So when you have your main guy doing that, you're going to expect to have that energy all around on the team side. But with this game against Kentucky obviously is a very, very good offensive team. I think they had the third best offense. Yeah. So obviously you wanted to limit what they were able to do. I thought we gave up a lot of threes early on, which I didn't want to see. You kind of wanted to replicate the style you had against them last game when you went to Rupp Arena, where we really ran them off the 3-point line. And we didn't do that instantly, but as the game went on, we were able to do that, holding some of their better shooters to some poor shooting splits. But I really think it was the second half where they were able to open it up. It felt like everything was falling. Mark Sears was really feeling himself, able to get to the line. He converted on all of his free throws that he attempted, as well as a lot of his threes. His shooting percentages have increased. And of course, he's been able to really play off ball, given that LeBaron Philon has taken over the point guard position and really just been that facilitator that we've needed. I really like the line switch. I think it will benefit us in the long run to have Mark kind of in that spot up scenario. I think that's where he's more comfortable rather than having to do a million different things with the ball in his hand. It's caused a lot of turnovers for him in the past. So I felt like this was a better outcome. Still, I didn't like how much we turned the ball over. I mean, 15 times is a lot. But that's also going to come with the line switch as well. LeBaron had 5. So he's going to limit that. But other than that, it was a great bounce back win. You liked what you saw, especially on the offensive end. I don't think there's really any team that can outpace us on the offensive end at this point. I mean, we are so far past the number of possessions we have reached. I mean, you would literally have to have a team of flashes out there in order to beat that pace of play. But you got to continuously improve on the defensive end and limit the amount of turnovers. That has been the thing that has consistently ruined your chance of winning games. So you got to keep improving in those areas. And obviously the rest of the schedule is not easy. As we continue saying, you have Mississippi State at home, and then you go on the road to Knoxville to play a very, very good Tennessee team. He's coming off a great win on the road at Texas A&M. And then, of course, you have Florida, and then you go to Neville to play Auburn. So not any easy games left, but really games to prove yourself and get yourself right, to carry a lot of momentum into the SEC tournament. And then from then on, see what you do there and carry that momentum into March Madness. But as we saw last year, Grace wanted to know that even with momentum in these certain situations, your team can flip a switch when it comes to margin and even fall apart. So this isn't the end-all be-all on how you end the regular season or how you participate in the tournament. It would just be nice to see them win out.
Nathan, you mentioned it briefly about Grant Nelson struggling. And Gray, I'll ask you this because you have experience playing the big man position in high school. Yep. Grant Nelson struggles. How was he able to bounce back and play like the Grant Nelson we saw play Kentucky at Rupp Arena when he dropped 25 points and 11 rebounds, and like he did last year in the tournament when he needed to step up? How is he able to get right when the team needs him to with the upcoming schedule and the impending March Madness?
Well, he's going to have to. I think that's a big point, and I think Alabama needs Grant Nelson to be what he was against North Carolina in the Sweet 16 a year ago, and what he was in Lexington a couple weeks ago when Alabama went on the road to their first win against Kentucky. I think a lot of it the past few weeks, we have not seen the confidence from Grant Nelson. Confidence is a real big thing in basketball, and especially when you're talking about a kid. Now, Grant Nelson's 22. He's been in Alabama. This is his second year in Alabama. He's a kid. He needs confidence. Right now, I don't see him as confident as he was in that North Carolina game and in that Kentucky game, where everything was going right for him and he was playing at his best, but he hasn't returned to that. And I think a lot of the confidence needs to start on the defensive end. I think he needs to turn defense into offense a little more. Grant really struggles getting beat off the dribble, and he doesn't use his length well enough. When he is at his best defensively, when he's blocking shots, because he's a crazy athlete, and we know what he can do athletically around the rim on the offensive and defensive end. When he's at his best defensively is when he's at his best offensively, because that confidence carries over from the defensive side to the offensive side.
So let's flip over to the cross-state rival and talk about the Auburn Tigers. After last week, their big win over Alabama, there was worry that there was going to be some hangovers, some not playing good off the high, beating your arch rival in their home arena. And they did struggle against Arkansas and against Georgia a little bit. How was Auburn able to fend off that high and beat two what most would consider lower-tier SEC teams, Gray?
Well, I know it's kind of a beaten horse at this point, but we have Janai, y'all don't. That's really what it's come down to these past two games against Arkansas and especially against Georgia is number 4 is in white, not in red. And that's why we're going to win. But his production has been the big thing. Auburn didn't shoot the ball well in either of these two games, and obviously coming off the high against that 1-2 matchup in Coleman, getting that win, and coming back home for 2 games. Two games, not necessarily against bad teams, but against teams that have underachieved this year from what I think that they should have been achieving, like an Arkansas team who is playing their best basketball right now, and then a Georgia team who has a lot of really, really good players on that team. They just haven't won the games that they've needed to win recently. But Auburn, even with the struggle shooting, even with a little bit of the hangover, just like you mentioned, Alex, even with the struggles on the 3-point and in general, Auburn's able to win these games because, number one, like I just mentioned, Janai Broome is the National Player of the Year. He takes over games, and when he takes over games, Auburn wins. There's a lot of players in college basketball right now that are absolutely fantastic, maybe future NBA superstars that can take over a game. But they're not going to take over – they can't immediately take over a game and immediately bring their team from not winning a game to winning a game. Janai Broome can. And that's what he did in these 2 games, honestly. And then the defensive end. Like we saw how good Auburn was on the defensive end when they played, I think, in my opinion, the best offense in the country against Alabama in Coleman Coliseum last Saturday. We saw what they were able to disrupt on the defensive end. They were able to disrupt Mark Sears. They were able to disrupt Aiden Holloway. They weren't allowing Grant Nelson to get that confidence, just like I was mentioning earlier. It wasn't happening. And that was because of what Auburn was doing defensively, their scheme defensively and their talent of guarding the guards. But that's what's carrying over. That's what, no matter what, if the ball's going in from 3-pointers or not, from threes or not, if we're missing bunnies that normally fall or not, on the defensive end, you know you can count on it. And that starts with the point guard, Denver Jones. He has been outstanding. Look, he is not going to win SEC Defensive Player of the Year or National Defensive Player of the Year or be on the Naismith All-Defensive Team, but damn, he should. Because he affects games so much. What he was doing to guys like to John L. Davis, to Adam Thiero, and then to the Georgia game, what he was doing to Demery, Silas Demery Jr., 4 of 16 from the field. And then you think about what he did to Braden Smith against Purdue and what he did to Mark Sears against Alabama. It's huge. And having a player like that completely changes what you can do offensively, because then you're out on the break, you're out on the run, and you've got players that can score in transition. This is a really well-rounded Auburn team. Obviously, 4 tough tests to finish it off, 4 quad 1 games to try and finish it off. You win. So they're at 14 right now. The record is 17. If you win all 4, that's the record for most quad 1 wins in a season. But also you'll have every SEC tournament game will be an opportunity as well. So it's not like you should be worried about that. I think Auburn's gap on number 1 right now just continues to grow. See if we can take care of business and complete the sweep on Wednesday against Ole Miss. That's a team that gave you some problems offensively in the Pavilion in Oxford a couple weeks ago, but you were able to respond, and Janai Broome was fantastic, and Chad Baker-Pizarro was outstanding, and that sort of thing. And then 3 really, really tough tests, going on the road to A&M, on the road to Kentucky, or on the road to Kentucky, then on the road to A&M, and then home against Alabama. That's 3 really tough tests to get you ready for the SEC tournament and on. Really excited for March. I think this team is built for March. They got good enough guards, especially on the defensive end, and the best player in the country, and that's a good combination.
Great. I'll ask you this hypothetical question here. If Auburn goes 2-1 or 3-0 in their final 3 games and then manages to lose in the SEC tournament, and we have a different SEC champion, whether that be Alabama, Florida, Tennessee, A&M, or if they're a surprise team, does Auburn still get the number 1 overall seed? Or do you think the committee gives it to the SEC champion winner?
Yes, absolutely. That shouldn't be a question. You see the resume?
Yes.
I think anyone in the country could agree at this point.
I've seen people say Duke if Auburn loses the SEC championship.
That is ridiculous. In the conference they play in.
I don't agree with it. I'm just saying what people are saying.
So that hypothetical, which you said, Alex, that hypothetical has Auburn beating Ole Miss. That's another quad 1 win. That gets them to 15, and then wins 2 of their last 3 against A&M, at Kentucky, and Alabama at home. So that would get them to 17. That would be 17-3 at quad 1, and then not winning the SEC tournament. I don't want to put this here, but that may be the greatest resume of all time.
Yeah, that's
not just in the season. This season, that may be the greatest resume of all time, because that would win Auburn the SEC regular season championship in the toughest conference in college basketball's history. And look, winning the SEC tournament this year may be harder than winning the NCAA tournament this year because of how insane the SEC is, how much talent there is. And then you're talking about playing back-to-back-to-back days on a neutral floor. Mm-hmm. It may be harder to win the SEC tournament this year than it is going to be the NCAA tournament. Because those are all quad 1 games. All of them. Unless you're playing South Carolina, LSU, or Oklahoma, it's a quad 1 game in the SEC tournament. That's insane. And if you win that conference in the regular season by multiple games, which Auburn is on pace to do, and in that hypothetical, they would have done. Absolutely the number 1 overall seed.
And you said Duke was the main team to defend against them.
I'm not saying I would never, ever put Duke as number 1 overall team. You know that, Nathan Gray. That is
the most ridiculous thing ever in the joke of the conference they play in.
You're telling me that Syracuse isn't a quad 1?
Let me kind of pull back that discussion a little bit to talk about the National Player of the Year discussion. What in the world is people's obsession with Cooper Flagg? Look, don't get me wrong. Cooper Flagg is an outstanding player. Going to be a great in the NBA. He's built for the NBA. That's his play style. They've got a really good team around him, filled with 5 stars. I would hope they would do well in that league. I mean, they're by far the best team in that league. But you're talking about Janai Broome, who not only has better numbers than Cooper Flagg, was also hurt for 3 games, which ruins his numbers. And he's doing it in the best conference that we've ever had in college basketball. The National Player of the Year discussion is over. It is over. It was over when Janai had 16 or 19 points and 14 rebounds against Alabama. It was over when he hit his first 2 threes against Alabama. It was 9-0. That's when it ended. Because Duke, the last ranked team, that Duke has played, not just beat, but played, was Auburn on December 4th. And before that, it was Kentucky.
It's ridiculous.
Those are two SEC teams. Oh my gosh. Maybe we should realize the best player on the best team and by far the best conference should be the player of the year. And also, Bruce Pearl is the coach of the year. Because you win the best conference in the history of college basketball, you should win coach of the year, especially with 1 5-star on your team.
Yeah, but you got people collecting AARP on your team, Gray. You got Chad Baker-Mazar over there.
Yeah, you got people as old as Luka. What's going on?
There's going to be some real people, some really upset people when Chad Baker-Mazar returns next year as a 26-year-old.
It's going to be Diego Pavia.
Because that's Diego. That's
Lord.
The Diego Pavia.
How do we get to
was
Diego
JUCO.
Pavia?
That's what's going to allow not only Chad Baker-Mazar the option to return, but also Chaney Johnson and Denver Jones. Pretty scary.
And well, let's move away from these two awesome teams in Alabama and Auburn. And we haven't really done this all year, guys, but let's talk about some other teams around the country in college basketball because we spend so much time with the Tigers and the Tide. Who to you has been the most surprising team and the most disappointing team as we head into the end of college basketball regular season?
Disappointing. I'm just going to go ahead and take it before Nathan steals it. Before you,
I already go ahead and say it.
Arkansas. They're what the hell? John Calipari comes in preseason top 10 of the country. They bring in John L. Davis from Florida Atlantic, who's the superstar who took Florida Atlantic to the Final Four, and they've got all these superstars coming from Kentucky, 5 stars. I know, and look, they're playing their best basketball right now. John Calipari has they're playing their best basketball at this moment, which is the way to do it. But
not Big Z though.
They've been terrible. Oh yeah. Oh, you mean 0 of 10 against Auburn?
0 of 10. Cannot.
And then I think the most surprising team, I got to go with St. John's and Rick Pitino. That team was just over 500 last year. And what they've done in the Big East is what Rick Pitino did at Kentucky and at Louisville and wherever he's been. That team embodies Rick Pitino. You know, I always say Auburn embodies Bruce Pearl and Alabama embodies Nate Oates. And your team runs off of who your coach is. A perfect example is St. John's this year. They're outstanding. They're unbelievable on the defensive end. If they can just shoot, if they can get hot at the right time, literally sky's the limit for that St. John's team.
Gosh, I mean, this is pretty easy to go disappointing. I mean, AP preseason number 1, Kansas is currently not ranked as of February 24th, 2025. Talk about fall off, the number of moves they made in the offseason, the transfers they got in. You thought this team was going to be built for a national championship. Well, guess what? Hunter Dickinson is not a recipe for success. I don't understand.
Neither is Adams, neither is Store, neither is Rylan Griffin.
Yeah, you can get on the list. What Bill Self has failed to do with the talent on his team has been the biggest downfall I've ever seen. Because we love to talk about how good of a coach Bill Self is, but with the amount of talent he has right now and what he's doing right now is 2 different things. In my opinion, Kansas, they're not a even tournament team in my eyes at this point in time with the way they've been playing. If they didn't have some of the wins on their resume that they do, you'd be on the bubble right now, and that is horrible with what you've finished with in the past last season, and then going into this season, what you got in the transfer portal. But going away from that and going to surprising team, I've really liked what Missouri has been able to do.
Yes.
And what Dennis Gates has really built at Missouri, especially after last season not winning a conference game. That was very, very hard on that team and hard on the development of their program. But they really have flipped the switch this season, and especially going into these more spring months, they've been playing some of the best basketball in the country. This is a team that can shoot lights out, but also play really, really physical defense. and what Dennis Gates continues to do at Missouri, I'm going to be excited to watch. That's a team that can be a very good program for years to come, just based off the history alone. But especially surrounding Dennis Gates with the talent, he is a very smart coach, and he knows how to run that program. And I think Missouri is going to continue to be one of the more surprising teams as we enter March. I think they can probably make a deep run.
All right, Alex, say it for most disappointing. It's going to hurt me. It's going to hurt you. Go ahead.
Indiana. I'm going to go Indiana.
No, I think that wasn't it. No, I think you're missing.
I mean, UConn's up there as well. Dan Hurley.
Yeah.
But that wasn't what I was going with. But go ahead.
But Indiana, number one portal class. You bring back your point guard in Galloway. You bring in Omar Bello, Cannon Carlisle, Miles Rice. Everybody thinks this team's going to win the Big Ten. What was expected to be a pretty down year for the conference. But Mike Woodson, awful. He's stepping down at the end of the year. I realize they picked up a big win against Purdue last week, but to not be ranked with the roster you brought in transfer portal-wise, I know those rankings can be inaccurate at times. Disappointing for Indiana and what is a pretty weak Big Ten this year. But most surprising, I'm going to stay in the Big Ten and go with Michigan State. Tom Izzo, this roster, you look at it top to bottom, not his best roster he's ever had. Has two players averaging over 10 points per game, that being Jaden Akins and then a freshman, Jace Richardson. He's the son of Jason Richardson. Nobody expected Jace Richardson to be this good, and I really did not expect Michigan State to be this good. But they picked up some big wins. They're number 8 right now. Tom Izzo has them playing the way Tom Izzo wants them to play basketball, which he has struggled in years past, get this team ready. But when he gets into March, if they're playing this good now, I can only imagine how good they're going to be playing March, which is Tom Izzo's month. Everybody knows it's Tom Izzo. It goes January, February, Izzo.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
But to be as undermanned as they are, coming from a talent perspective, not having a big addition in the portal or a big 5-star that everybody's clamoring at, and Tom Izzo being ranked number 8 in the country with all these SEC powerhouse schools and everybody playing good basketball is just insane to me. Utterly insane. Who were y'all thinking I was going to say for most disappointing?
I'll go ahead and add mine to it. Okay. The inability of Hubert Davis to land a big man in the transfer portal was the same inability of Hugh Freeze not to land a damn quarterback this past offseason and just stick with Peyton Thorne. North Carolina is terrible. They're so bad to watch. And yes, I will say, just like I said about Arkansas, as of right now, they're playing their best basketball. Winners of 4 straight. They just absolutely clobbered NC State to complete the sweep on those trash Wolfpack people. But North Carolina's bad. With the returning All-American, Elliott Cadeau, Ian Jackson, Drake Powell, and some of those players have been pretty good for North Carolina this year. But the lack of post presence and the lack of rebounding has hurt this team so bad. The missing Armando Bacot, hey, it hurt. It hurts. And you've got North Carolina people questioning if Hubert Davis is the right guy for the job, and Roy Williams going on podcast and defending him. And it's just not looking good in Chapel Hill right now, even with the talent on that roster.
Yeah, Nate Oates is in Hubert Davis's nightmares. I will tell you that much. And the fact that Armando Bacot made up so much of what North Carolina was worries me so much for the future of that program. Because as soon as Armando Bacot's gone, they have folded. The beginning of the season has not gone the way they wanted it to. I think I can really pinpoint. We were watching the Kansas game. And the absolute collapse in that game and not being able to finish, I think, was the precursor for how the season went or how it has been going. And then going on to, of course, the Alabama game where you just got smacked around at home. You couldn't really compete. And then you can bring up the Duke matchup. You hadn't been able to do what you need to do against these bigger programs, and then not to mention you have failed to take care of some of these.
In a few weeks,
yeah. The second matchup is what we're focusing on here. But
that's not playing either.
Yeah, you're just not going to play it.
No, we forfeit. I don't want to watch Elliot Cadeau hook up 3-pointers and our centers get absolutely worked down low by Maluch or whoever's playing center.
It just North Carolina could be such a good team. They have the talent to do so. They didn't do what they need to do in the offseason to improve. And I understand they went after Cliff Amore. They got stuffed in the locker on that one. You didn't get Darren Stevenson, and the year before you got stuffed in the locker on that one. So at some point, Hubert Davis is going to have to figure out a way to recruit and go out of the box because he has not been able to do what he has needed to do for North Carolina to be successful. And I don't know. I mean, the amount of talent, and you're not winning. It's not consistent, and I will give him a little bit of slack because it is a tough place to coach. It is exactly like coaching football at Alabama with the high expectations, what the fan base wants from you. It's not easy to replace a guy like Roy Williams, but at some point you're going to have to turn around and figure it out because you're not going to get this infinite amount of time to turn the team around.
Missing the tournament 2 years at his 4-year tenure is just not – you can't do that at a place like North Carolina. You could do that at a 2014 Auburn or a 2014 Alabama.
Good old Tony
If you make the tournament 2 out of 4 years in a row, you build a statue for it. But doing that at North Carolina with the type of talent that he's had in his 4 years, and really the 2022, they weren't good either. They just got hot at the right time and ended up in the national championship. And then the preseason number 1 going into the next year, terrible. Missed the tournament. Terrible. And then really good year last year. RJ Davis was a superstar last year, losing the Sweet 16 to Alabama. And then this year, you're not making the tournament. Unless you go on a run in the ACC tournament, you're not making the tournament. With the type of talent and superstars and North Carolina legends that he has had, and he's 2 out of 4 to make the NCAA tournament.
Should have won his first year, too. Should have won his first year. Had a big lead in the national championship.
Should have won the championship, yep.
Talk about crapping up the pants.
Yep.
It's bad.
The problem with Hubert Davis is you missing the portal on Kate Tyson, Van Allen Lubin, and Jalen Washington isn't the big man you want him to be. And you have a point guard that cannot shoot the 3-pointer in Elliot Cadeau, who I am baffled with at how poor he plays sometimes. he's either the best point guard in North Carolina history or he is legitimately worse than high school starting point guards around the country. And then you have RJ Davis, who is either let me shoot above 50% from the field or let me shoot a whopping 1 for 15. And so Tribble's never healthy, and when he is, he plays really good, but it's just like Hubert Davis, the inability to build this roster and not get the players he wants out of the portal, I don't even know. That hurts my head.
We could go on and on about this.
Okay, tough question. Would y'all rather have RJ Davis right now or Caleb Love?
RJ Davis, because I know what I'm getting with RJ Davis for the most part. Caleb Love,
that's fair,
I mean, he has attitude problems. You saw him crash out in the BYU handshake line this past weekend. I don't need that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do appreciate that shot he made over Duke, though. I do appreciate that.
As far as I'm concerned, they're the same person.
All right, let's get out of here, guys. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening and watching, students of the game.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.